So now let's take a look at Gideon. In Judges chapter 6, verse 12, we're introduced to this man with these words. The angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. He said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Which is really a funny statement because when we meet Gideon, he's hiding. He's threshing wheat in a place where he believes other people will not see him because he's afraid that they're going to come and attack him. And in his fear and in his hiding, God comes to him and says, "You are a mighty warrior." and Gideon would have been like, "Me? Like, do you not know the circumstances here?" But see, God saw his potential and God saw his heart. And God knew what Gideon was capable of with God's help. So he referred to him by what he could become, a mighty warrior. And then he put together a plan. And he put together a plan that I'm pretty sure no human being would ever come up with. We find that plan in chapter 7, verse 2. The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands." So he said to Gideon, "Gideon, I want you to go into battle. I want you to pull all your soldiers together, and we're going to go fight the Midianites. We just have one problem. You have too many men." Now, this is not normally how you do military strategy, but God's putting together an adventure for Gideon. So he says, "Here's what I want you to do, Gideon. I want you to call all the men together and tell them, any of you that would prefer to go home, it's okay. You don't have to fight this battle. You can go home without repercussions." And we read in verse 3, "Announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. Now, if you're Gideon, you're probably thinking, well, I'm sad that 22,000 left, but I got the best 10,000. Like, these are the warriors, these are the fearless ones. So with 10,000 fearless men, I can make this happen. And then God came to him again and said, "Well, okay, this is good, but you still have too many men. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take that 10,000, walk them down to the creek, and tell them all to get a drink of water. And any of those men who get down on their knees and stick their face in the water and start drinking, send them home. Any men that kneel down on their knee, scoop up water, bring it to their mouth, and lap it up like a dog while they're looking around, you keep those men." So he did. He sent them all down, told them to just go get a drink of water without instructions. And we read in verse 6, 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. So how you doing? You went from 32,000 down to 10,000, and now you got 300. And God says, "Now we're ready." See, at this point now, if God doesn't show up, make this thing happen, there's no way for Gideon to win this with 300 men. But God's made it very clear. And so Gideon says, "Okay, we're going to do this." And then God does come back one more time and says, "Okay, I'm glad you got the 300, but they're equipped wrong. So get rid of the spears, get rid of the arrows, and instead give every man a clay pot and a trumpet. And then we're ready to go to battle." Now, from a military point of view, this is absurd. But when God puts together an absurd plan and puts his hand of favor on it, it works. And Gideon is now at a place where all he can do is cry out to God for help and say, "God, I'm here, I'm available. I'm going to walk in this thing. It looks impossible, but I'm here." And it was one of the greatest victories in the history of the nation of Israel. Because that's how God works. When he calls you on an adventure, it works. If it's your own adventure, it may or may not work. But when it's God initiating it, it always works. And one of my favorite stories in all the Bible about how God calls men out is the feeding of the 5,000 in Luke chapter 9. The men have been with Jesus. They have been out ministering all day long. And Jesus, being the popular teacher that he was, he attracted a crowd. We're told that there were 5,000 men who came out. The implication is they brought their families. So we're probably looking at somewhere between 12 and 20,000 people that showed up to hear Jesus teach. Well, after they've been at it all day, the disciples, being men, know that, boy, everybody's got to eat. We're all getting hungry. And so they went to Jesus and they said, "Hey, Jesus, we've been here all day. These people are all getting hungry. Send them away to get something to eat." And Jesus just turned and looked at them and simply said, "You give them something to eat." How are you doing at this point, guys? Like they're like, okay. So they went and found everything they could find. They pulled together all of their resources. They came back to Jesus with the equivalent of 2 lunches. And they said to Jesus, "Here's what we've got." You ever felt like that, man? You have businesses to build. You have families to raise. You have ministries to be involved in. You have a community that needs your talents and your time. And if you watch the news or you look around, it doesn't take you long to become aware that there are needs everywhere. And people are looking to you to have solutions and resources to take care of them. And in light of all that, have you ever felt like all you have to bring to the table is just 2 lunches? Well, that's exactly where the disciples were at. They had this overwhelming need, and they're very aware that on their own they can never meet this need. That with the resources they have, they could never possibly take care of everybody that's involved. And it's exactly where Jesus wanted them to be. Because when we put our small resources together with the big resources of God, things happen. And so Jesus looked at these guys and said, "Well, if that's what you got, I can work with it." And he took their little bit of fish and a little bit of loaves of bread, and he added his resources to it. And not only did everybody who was there eat until they were full, but every disciple picked up a trash bag of leftovers as a statement to them that when God calls you to an adventure, he will resource it and make it work. And all we have to do is bring what we have and give God a chance. And one of the greatest examples of God calling men out is in Matthew 28. It's the Great Commission. He's speaking this to his disciples who have been following him around for 3 years. And these men, like, they would not have necessarily been around the world. Even though Jesus was going to say to them, "Go and make disciples of all nations." Now, these men would have seen people from the nations of the world because they lived in Capernaum. Capernaum was the hometown of Jesus during his earthly ministry. It's the place where Peter's house was located. It's the place where the synagogue was, where Jesus did most of his teaching. It is the town right outside of the area where Jesus fed the 5,000, where he shared the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, it was his home base when he was operating here on earth. And it was on the trade route between the east and Jerusalem. So people of the world passed through Capernaum on a regular basis. So the disciples would have seen people from other nations. It's doubtful whether they actually traveled to other nations. And here's Jesus looking these men in the eye and say, "I want you to go and make disciples of all nations. I want every culture, every people group, every language group to hear about the goodness of God through your ministry." Now again, these guys would have been overwhelmed. They would have had no idea where to start. If they had sat down to have a strategy meeting, they would have never come up with a plan. They might have come up with a plan to reach Capernaum. They might have had a plan to reach the area around the Sea of Galilee. They might have even had a plan to reach the whole nation of Israel. It's doubtful they would have come up with a plan to reach the whole world. And yet this is the kind of thing that God does. He looked a bunch of ordinary guys in the eyes, said, "Let's do this. Let's make disciples of all nations." And now all they can do is trust and say, "God, I don't know how we're going to do it. I don't know how we're going to get there. I don't know how we're going to pay for it. But you called us to do this. So let's go do it." And so before we wrap up today, I'll just take a few moments right now and ask yourself 2 questions. First question is, which of these stories do you relate to the best? Which of these stories hit home with who you are? And as you think about this adventure that God has for you, the key thing to remember is that God initiates the call. Like you don't have to figure it out on your own. You don't have to come up with the idea. You don't have to be the creative genius that figures out all that God wants you to do. All you have to do is get yourself ready. Because at the right time, with the right thing, God's going to call you out to a life that's bigger than you. You just need to be prepared to say yes.